Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jenny Parks from MEC, the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, joining you from Minneapolis with a webinar entitled SARA101. I appreciate all of you who've already signed on and those of you who are continuing to sign on. Today's presentation is aimed at those of you who are new to SARA or need a refresher, and also those of you at institutions who hear about this character SARA and you have no idea why she wants all these numbers and all this information. So we're going to get you up to speed and hopefully make you a little bit more comfortable and give you some resources to work with. I'm joined here in the MEC conference room by Emily Jacobson, who is the M-SARA coordinator, and Mary Robertson, who is our Director of Communications here at MEC. So in the interest of time, I want to make sure we get through everything quickly today and get to all of your questions. Please note that your questions will come in via the chat function on the ReadyTalk platform. And if we can, Mary will be answering technical questions. Emily will be answering which questions she can, and the others will wait until we get to the end of the presentation. I do see one question already. It says, is there a note sheet for the presentation? I do not believe there's a note sheet, but this will be available and posted to our website soon, so you would be able to access it again. All right, so welcome to SARA101. There I am. Okay, for those of you who haven't met me, this is me. I'm Jenny Parks, and I am the director of the Midwestern part of SARA. There are 4 people in the nation who do the kind of work I do. I'm only one of them. But I do like to refer to the others as the Jenny of the West or the Jenny of the Northeast, just because that's a little bit more helpful if your frame of reference happens to be having worked with me. So I think I mentioned before the intended audience for this webinar. I forgot to mention this might also be something helpful for leadership. Often when you need to renew SARA membership or initiate SARA membership, leadership is unfamiliar with this, especially if they're new to their position. So again, hopefully this will be a resource that you can use over and over again. So here is our agenda for today. The first thing I'll do is give you an overview of the purpose, structure, and the scope of SARA, the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement. And then I'll also walk you through the process of how an institution applies to SARA and also how an institution complies with SARA. For those of you who want a more detailed explanation of the application process, you can look at the webinar from the spring of 2014. We do have one on our website there. Now the application has changed in a couple of places since then, but we'll be updating that webinar as well. But it does give you a lot of information at that point. Then the third section will be some recommendations for best practices and some resources you can use to help you with your state authorization and SARA practice. And then we'll go on to the comments and the questions. So first, let's talk about the purpose of the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, otherwise known as SARA. You'll notice a little logo there. That's one that once you join SARA, it's important to put that on your website and any materials where you want to communicate to students that, hey, this is something, we belong to this reciprocity agreement, because it does allow you to do some things and gives you some flexibility with your cross-state and distance ed programming that a non-SARA school does not have that much flexibility in. So I'm going to try to explain the difference right now between state authorization and SARA. I do often find people using the 2 terms interchangeably, synonymously, and I think it's important to understand that state authorization came first. State authorization basically means you have to find a way, if you're an institution in one state, to operate legally in a second state. Now that could be you have on the ground, you put a branch campus on the ground, you put recruiters on the ground, you have adjunct faculty living there, or it could be you're sending distance coursework over there. There can be any number of things, but as soon as your organization crosses a state line and engages in activities, you have to abide by the laws and the regulations of that state. And that the process of coming into compliance there is called state authorization. And this has been something that's been around for a long time because each state has its own set of laws for higher education. But it really only became something that people paid careful attention to after October 2010 when the when the federal rules, the program integrity rules were put out, there was a concern about the behavior of certain bad actors in the distance education sphere, and so the Department of Ed under the Obama administration put out the state authorization rules in 2010 and said eventually these rules, compliance with state authorization rules will be connected to Title IV eligibility. Now, actually at that time, that rule did not stick. It was vacated for procedural grounds, but as we get into a little bit later into the presentation, we'll find out that a version of it has come back and will be in place by July 1st, 2018, but we'll get back to that. So there's always been a process where you had to obey the rules of the state where you are engaged in educational activities. And the way that you went through getting that authorization, we'll look at my imaginary state here. Let's assume it's an imaginary state with 4 institutional higher ed institutions. You notice there are a bunch of red lines emanating from each institution. That's because each institution would have to go to each other state in which they're engaged in educational activities and figure out and apply for the appropriate registration, exemption, permission, or authorization to operate there. And all of the laws were different in each place. All of the processes were different in each place. All of the definitions of what's called physical presence, meaning you're doing something here that triggers the need for us to authorize you. So this was what we would call the traditional state authorization process. And after a few years of people scrambling to make sense of this and stay on top of this, a bunch of smart people got together and said, hey, can't we make this more reciprocal? Isn't there something we can do? You know, when you get married in one state, you can go to the other state and still observe that marriage license. Or if you get a driver's license in one state, you can go to the other one. Can't we say there's a certain set of principles by which we can all abide and agree to, and then, wow, all of a sudden we're going to be good to go? Well, that's the whole SARA model. SARA is an acronym for the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, and the SARA process for state authorization looks very different. So in that same state, once it joins SARA, it will set up what's called a state portal entity. You'll see it there in the big red letters. And if you click on that, that will link to the list of the state portal entities in all of the member states of SARA. All of those entities are responsible now for authorizing the export of distance ed out of their state from their state's institutions rather than every state entity authorizing the import from all the others. It's much more streamlined, it's much more consistent, and it takes advantage of the fact that the portal entities are often the entities in the state that already have existing relationships with their institutions, and therefore that closeness makes it a lot easier for them to judge whether that institution is going to do a good job and take care of students. So the institution will apply to its state portal entity to participate in SARA, and after that, the institution can engage in a set of activities. It's a consistent list in all of the other states. So that's the big overview there. So one of the things I wanted to do was make the main point here that the purpose of SARA is to make it more efficient and more compliant for students to access institutions that offer distance educational services across state lines. And I say that because it is not uncommon. Now I'm going to do a little bit of dramatic reading here. We regularly get a phone call, and I kid you not, we get this one all the time. So ring, ring, ring. Hey, this is Jenny. What can I do for you? Well, I want to do this internship in another state, and I understand that I can't do it because SARA's getting in the way. And I'll have to say, well, no, not quite. What do you know about SARA? I don't know who she is, but she's getting in my way, and I need to do this internship. And I'll say, well, actually it's not SARA, the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, that's getting in your way. If there is a problem with you doing an internship in another state, it could be an issue of state authorization. But again, it's not the state's problem. It's actually not even a problem, it's a process. And you need to go back to your institutional folks and see if they are members of SARA, then you can engage in that internship in all of the other SARA states without going through an additional process. If they are not a SARA institution, they're going to need to go through that traditional state authorization process to put that into to set that in motion. Or if you're going into a non-SARA state, we do still have a few of those left, you're going to need to go through that traditional process. So it's really important to understand that SARA is one tool to help you address the state authorization process. They are not the same, and trust me, SARA is not getting in your way. It is your biggest fan and your biggest helper in trying to access educational programs across the nation. Now I'll talk to you a little bit about the structure of SARA. There is a national framework. It's called NC-SARA, the National Council for SARA. It's located in Boulder, Colorado. It has a very small staff. There are only 4 of them there. It's amazing that 4 people have been able to do more, but we're told that there are going to be 2 more people there soon, and we're very excited about that. The executive director is Marshall Hill, and that's Marshall's picture right there in case you ever meet him. He answers to the National Council Board, which has 22 members. If you click on that link there that I have, you'll be able to see who the members of the National Council are. The National Council meets twice a year to look at, to develop and approve policy and to help coordinate the work of the 4 regional SARAs. And so that gives you a little bit of an idea of the overarching framework at the national level. And if you click on that link that says meets twice a year, it will give you access to the historic board materials and agendas for those meetings. So SARA is also organized at a regional level. So for example, our regional level, all of you probably, or most of you, are from the Midwestern region. And so we organize our efforts out of the Midwestern Higher Education Compact here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And that's a picture of Emily. She is our coordinator. And there are only 2 of us here who do SARA. We answer to a regional steering committee. And if you click on that link, again, you're going to see the members of our steering committee. Our steering committee meets quarterly, and they review and approve state memberships. And they review and recommend policies to the national level. They hear from the states, and they decide on the types of improvements to SARA procedurally and philosophically that would be helpful, and we kick those upstairs to Boulder. So the other 3 regions are the Southeast, and they are coordinated by SREB, the Southern Regional Educational Board, NETI, the New England Board of Higher Education, and WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. So like I said, there are 4 regional higher education compacts who actually administer SARA. Then there's a state level of SARA. I think I've mentioned already that at the state level, we have what are called the state portal entities. Oops, is that not? Oh, there we go. So the state portal entities, there are 11 M-SARA or Midwestern SARA states, and there are a total of 47 states and 2 territories that have joined SARA now. And in each of those places, there is it's kind of a one-stop shop. It's where it'll be your first line of communication for all SARA questions, and it's also going to be where you send your SARA application. It's also it's important to understand that depending on the state, it will vary by the type of entity it is. In some places, it is the existing Board of Higher Education, but in other places, it could be another regulatory agency. They're going to differ in the size of their staff. They are also going to differ in their state fees. In some of our states, there's no state fee to join SARA because they have other resources they're able to use for that. In some states, it's the only way they were going to be able to join because they need to be able to fund that agency. And if you click on where it says state fees there, you can see what the fees are in each of the SARA member states and districts. The main thing that the portal agency does is to review and approve institutional applications. Again, if you see it says institutional applications there, that you can click on that and it will take you to the most recent version. All right. Oh, and I need to stop saying that you can click on the links in the webinar because they're not ready to go in the webinar. They will be. We will give you these links at the end of the webinar in a separate sheet. So sorry about that. If I'm confusing everyone, I apologize. So anyway, what was I saying? Oh, the institutional applications. Like I said, we've got a more detailed webinar from the spring of 2014 that helps you with that process. And but it's a new and improved application since that time. So when you do have the link to the institutional application, you'll be able to access it there. And there are two different ones. There's one for the initial application process and one for the renewal process. When an institution joins SARA, it joins for a year. And one more comment then about the state portal entities as we were talking about the structure of SARA. Another really important function of the state portal entity is to hear student complaints that rise above the institutional level. One of the great things that SARA has done is it has cleared up the path for a student in one state accessing the educational services of an institution in another state. It has cleared up what happens to the appeal of a student complaint. Traditionally, it was unclear. Did it go to some type of entity in where the student is located or where the institution is located? Under SARA, it goes to the portal entity of the state in which the institution is located. So that is the basic layers of the SARA organization. So let's take a look at the scope of SARA. I mentioned previously that once an institution joins SARA, it can engage in certain activities across state lines without seeking additional authorization, permission, dispensation, whatever word you want to apply to it. The institution can engage in those activities across state lines without having additional communication with the state. And that list includes, but is not limited to, 100% online distance education, advertising, recruiting, proctoring exams, contractual agreements with third-party vendors, placing servers on the ground in other SARA states. Online faculty, adjunct faculty can live in other states and serve the institution. There can be supervised field experiences. Those are like the internships we were just talking about, and field trips. This is the lion's share of the activities that the SARA agreement covers, but we'll talk in more specificity about how to access the SARA manual and the SARA agreement so that you have an idea of where you can actually look for some of those specifics. All right, so we are moving on from the beginning to the second section of the interview. How does an institution apply to and comply with SARA? It's really very straightforward. The first thing you need to know is, is your institution eligible to participate? In order to participate in SARA, an institution must be authorized to operate in its home state. It means that you've got that relationship with the higher ed entity in your state. In some cases, it's going to be a constitutional charter. In other cases, it's going to be some other type of document, or it's going to be a specific authorization process that you go through annually or every 5 years with your authorizing entity. Again, it's going to vary widely between the states. Your institution must be degree granting. That is an important part because the ability to grant a degree does something, it's a different activity, and it structures instruction a little bit differently from schools that are not degree granting. It must be accredited by an accreditor recognized by the Department of Education. And not only does the accreditor need to be recognized by the Department of Education, it also has to be an accreditor recognized to accredit distance education programs. And again, we can give you the link for that. We do have a number of our other webinars have that link available as well. One more requirement, if you are non-public, a private institution has to use their federal financial responsibility composite score. That is something that the Department of Ed calculates as a way to look at the financial health of the institution, and it's an important consideration in your Title IV agreement that you're going to have with the department. You need to have a score of a 1.5 or above as a private institution in order to qualify to participate in SARA, or if you have a score between a 1.0 and a 1.49, I should put that extra decimal point in there. Usually with some additional documentation, it's possible to approach your state portal agency and possibly get what's called a provisional approval. So how does an institution apply once you've decided, okay, we meet all of the criteria on that previous slide? What do we need to do now? Well, access the NC-SARA website or your state portal entity website. And the reason I say that is because some of the state portal entity websites, they have adapted the application so that it can be submitted electronically. So you're going to want to check your state portal entity website first before you decide to use the application that's on the NC-SARA website. But there's the link right there for you on the NC-SARA website if you would like to access and just take a look at that application. Okay, so here we are. We're at another phone call that I get with some frequency. Ring, ring, ring. Hi, this is Jenny. What can I do for you? Well, I'm the compliance officer at a nondescript Midwestern institution for the purposes of this call, and I'm filling out the SARA application. And I say, great, we're happy to have you. How can I help you? Well, I think I've done it all, but it just doesn't seem like I've done enough. Well, what have you done? And we go through, we check off, you've done this, 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 and this. I said, it sounds like you got it. Do you want to send it to me? I'll take a look. I take a look at them. Yeah, looks good. And they're like, but it didn't take me like 4 hours or 10 hours or 4 days, and I didn't have to call 20 people. I just kind of gathered some paperwork, and it just doesn't seem right. I mean, I've been doing state authorization compliance for a couple of years now, and it's never this easy. And I have to tell them, well, it is. We designed it that way on purpose. It really is that easy. I don't know. Are you sure? I'm like, yep, I'm sure. I do this every day. So I usually send that person off as a happy camper. They turn in the application. All goes well. That's an important thing to understand. If you're filling out the application and it seems very straightforward, it is. You don't need to worry. SARA was designed not to be duplicative and not to be burdensome because state authorization has enough of that already. We know that your relationship with your state portal entity or your state authorizing entity is one that we can say, okay, they know your institution well. As long as they can affirm your accreditation, affirm some of the pieces of the application, we're good to go. We don't need to duplicate those efforts. So just wanted to give you that in case you're concerned. That's one you don't need to worry about if and when you encounter it. Okay, so once you go ahead and submit the application and pay your state fees, if there are any, the portal entity is going to review that application, and if the application is approved, they're going to send you, some will send you a welcome letter, some won't, but I left that in there because that's what most of them do. There will be a link in that letter that allows you to log on to the NC-SARA site and register your school. That will generate an invoice that NC-SARA will send to you. You pay those fees, and once those fees clear at the NC-SARA, you go on the official SARA list. And that's when you do see the little guys, they're doing their SARA Happy Dance, because now it's a lot easier for them to do all of their state authorization work. And you don't have to do the SARA Happy Dance, but I highly recommend it. So when you apply, as I mentioned, you will have had possibly some state fees, but there are SARA annual fees, and they are determined by your full-time equivalent enrollment, and as you report to IPEDS, and you'll see that the fees are either $2,000, $4,000, or $6,000 a year, depending on the enrollments that I've listed there. So once you've applied, you've done the SARA Happy Dance, well, you've paid, you've done the dance, you're on the list, what do you need to do to make sure that you are playing by the SARA rules? Most of the things I'm about to describe are best practices. You're doing them for federal, state, and accreditor compliance anyway, but I do like to spell them out, so sometimes they can slip through the cracks. Well, so first of all, one of the things you'll notice on the SARA application is that either your president or chancellor, provost, some other high executive will be signing off on a number of things that the state, that the institution agrees to do to participate. And one of the things he or she will sign and agree to do is take responsibility for the actions of third-party providers in other states. And this could be a learning management platform. This could be someone who provides any other type of service. Now, and I do get a lot of people calling about that, worried about that, and my best piece of advice there is that I have yet to see a third-party provider contract that does not already have the institution taking responsibility for that third party's actions with regard to students. Now, that is just a part of the way it's always done, but we have it enumerated in SARA to make sure that people are thinking actively about it. You also have to agree to work with the home state portal agency to resolve any student complaints. The SARA complaint process, it makes it very, very clear. Students have to go through traditional institutional channels. And it's only after they have exhausted an institutional process, if they are still not satisfied, then they can take that complaint to the portal agency, and the institution joining SARA has to agree to work with that agency or that entity to resolve that complaint. You have to provide appropriate disclosures to students in programs or courses leading to professional licensure. That's a very, very important piece. You'll notice that's in red, and there are some links we'll be providing that will help you with that. SARA has always said that if you've got students who are in a program leading to licensure, you have to have some communication with them about whether or not your program meets the requirements for licensure in the state where the student is located while taking the courses or intends to practice. And that, I should say where the student is located. Where the student intends to practice is another layer that is coming, because I think I mentioned we've got some federal rules that are going to go into effect July 1st, 2018, and those mention heavily the need for professional licensure disclosures. So those are separate from SARA, but SARA does want you paying attention to your licensure disclosures, and you'll need to read carefully the SARA literature about that. But essentially, you have to let a student know affirmatively, yes, our programs lead to licensure in your state, and we verified that, or no, our programs don't lead to licensure in your state, and we verified that, or in some rare occurrences, we attempted to verify this, and we have been unable to. And I think actually that, I'm not even sure that third option will be available after the new federal rules go into effect, but for right now, that is your obligation under SARA. You also have to provide timely and accurate data reports to NC-SARA about your enrollments, your out-of-state online enrollment, distance ed enrollments. We just finished our reporting period this year, so those of you who've done that before are familiar with that, and that's where it's important. I wanted to make sure that and IR people had access to this type of a webinar, because it is usually your institutional research department where you are going to go and try to get some of that information. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. If you wanted to take a look, there's the link for the data reporting guide. The data reporting starts in May of each year, and like I said, it was May 22nd to June 14th this year, I believe. And currently, it is the number of students enrolled exclusively in distance education who are located out of the state in which the institution is located. It correlates directly to an IPEDS field that we reference in the data manual. Starting in 2018, there will be voluntary reporting of supervised field experiences in other states. That will be counted and mandatory as of 2019, and there will be much more information forthcoming about that reporting. One of the things that I like to remind people about is you need to keep really good data on your students all the time. But specifically, these are the types of things you need to ask yourself and keep data that answers. You need to ask yourself these questions and keep this kind of data about your SARA students. Remember, these are students who are not in the state where the institution is located, but they are taking courses or enrolled in programs from your institution. So the first thing you want to know is, where are our out-of-state students and staff located? Because staff is also part of SARA. You don't report that for data purposes, but you need to know for state authorization purposes where all your staff are located, because that is also a state authorization issue, one that is addressed by SARA. Then you have to ask yourself, in which activities do we engage in other states? Because many of those activities across state lines are covered by SARA, but some are not. And in some instances, you might think something is covered by SARA, but there could be some lack of clarity on that you'll have to find out. So again, it's important to know exactly what you're doing in other states. You want to know if any of your students are located in non-SARA states. And you want to know that because you need to serve them under the appropriate state authorization process for those states. The 3 states that are not a part of SARA right now are Florida, California, and Massachusetts, and they are at different stages of moving toward the SARA process. The 4th question you want to make sure you ask yourself is, are any of our students engaged in supervised field experiences in professional licensure programs in states where the professional boards regulate or oversee such placements? So when you've got someone doing an internship or some other type of supervised field experience, often those will be student teaching experiences, student nursing experiences. Whenever that experiential learning component of the course is integral to the licensure process, you will need to check with the relevant professional licensure board in that other state, because that professional licensure board might exercise some power over those placements, whether it's because they're trying to keep track of them, they're trying to allocate them, and privilege some of the residents of their states, which is understandable, or because they want to make sure that what's happening really does meet the needs of the licensure process. Whatever it is, you need to check with those. That's a really important component, and you need to be doing that as part of your data gathering for SARA. Another important thing to make sure you do is to keep up with your renewal date. As SARA, as we mature as an organization and we kind of plateau with the number of states and institutions that have joined, I think we're close to 1,600 institutions as of today. And like I said, we've got 47 states and 2 different territories. One of the things that we are doing is refining processes. But it is also really, as much as we try to communicate and get the word out to you, it's much better if the institution is keeping track as well of their renewal date. You will be notified 90 days in advance of your renewal date. There is a renewal process outlined on the website, and there's a renewal application on the website. Again, you're going to want to check with your portal entity website first, though, to see if they have one that they would like you to use, because of the ability to submit it electronically. Ideally, you get notified at 90 days and you submit your renewal application to your state portal entity, pay your state fees if that's the appropriate time to pay them, about 60 days before your expiration date. That gives them time to approve and then get your information back to NC-SARA. Once you are reapproved, they'll send you a letter again. That'll have your link to NC-SARA. They'll also have that logo information I referred to earlier that will allow you to put the SARA logo on your website. Anyway, you pay the fees and you're good to go for another year. Again, all of these things are well described on the NC-SARA website, and you will get a list of these types of links as part of the follow-up materials for this webinar. All right, moving on to Section 3. Some recommendations for best practices and some resources that will hopefully help you with your SARA and state authorization work. Okay, so some of the recommendations I have are just to make sure that you understand the difference between things. It will help you as you advise students, which is the most important concern. It will also help you in your work. I think we've already covered the difference between state authorization and SARA, but it's really important that people understand that state authorization is this process that existed before SARA, and SARA is one means by which you achieve parts of state authorization. It's a tool in the toolkit. There's also a paper on the WCET, the Western Cooperative for Educational Technology. They're housed at WICHE. They have a sister organization called SAN, the State Authorization Network, and they actually have a new set of state authorization papers they've published in the last month and put on their website. And I actually helped write the one about the difference between state authorization and SARA. So that would give you an even deeper dive into that, understanding that difference, especially if you have to explain it to other people on your campus. I also recommend, if at all possible, to house as many of your state authorization functions in one office as possible. And by that I mean it's nice to have access to institutional research and IT. It's good to have all the data available and to also have the ear of the signatory agent, because you're going to need to get, and your accreditation liaison. All of those people come together to help you with this application at various times, and it's good to make sure that if you are having any type of reorganization or anything, that you are thinking about where state authorization gets located, because we find that in campuses where it is centrally located, it tends to be more efficient and a lot less stressful for people. So just a recommendation if it's something that you can even do anything about. Make sure you establish really great working relationships with your institutional research department and with your IT department. Institutional research, because again, you're going to need some of this data that we've talked about, but also your IT department, because there are some things about your website that need to change or be enhanced because of your participation in SARA. I did do a webinar this last year, February 15th, on specific recommendations for how to improve your website. So that would be a resource for you as well. And that's actually why I thought to do the SARA101 webinar, because that was the main recommendation people made to me after that. So thank you. There will be an assessment after this, and please tell me what else you need me to do to help you with your SARA efforts. Another thing you can do is subscribe to the NC-SARA and the regional SARA newsletters. They're going to keep you up to date with which states just joined and which policies just changed. Those things are really helpful, and they come to you. It can be a fairly passive thing. You get it, you read it, and that way you're staying in the know. And then I would also recommend accessing the WCET and SAN websites and following their blogs. They're really great about also discussing and giving you the most up-to-date information on state authorization and SARA. Another set of recommendations is to again, if it is within your purview to do so, set up a way to track the location of your students. It is not uncommon for us to have people tell us, yeah, we don't track them that way. We're not really sure, did they move since they enrolled, etc. It's just very, very important, both for iPads and for SARA, for you to have a systematic way to track the location of your students, so that you know which activities you are engaging in out of state. This can be, different institutions do it different ways. We just always recommend that it go through whatever policy other data fields go through, any other type of logistical data fields. It needs to go through that process, and it needs to be logical, and it needs to be consistently applied, and needs to be reviewed once a year. Keep your leadership informed about state authorization and SARA. It is important. A lot of times the most difficult thing can be just getting on the calendar so that you can get that application signed. And then they're going to want to sign it, and then they're going to have lots of questions, so they might need to see, well, I wasn't aware of this component of our accreditation, or I've never seen, I don't know how this financial score works. So keep them informed, and if there is a change in leadership, get on their calendar to try to get them up to speed too. Hopefully this website can help you a little bit with that. Also, establish a working relationship with your state portal agent or agents. I work with the folks in the Midwest extensively, and to the one, they are gems. They're great, and they are there for you. They are advocates for students, and they want everything to go well. So they will help you a lot. Also, reach out to your colleagues at other institutions. It is amazing. I would say the state authorization world is fairly small, and we all feel each other's pain because it tends to be a fairly grueling task to work our way through all these regulations. And I have not found anyone who is not willing to share best practices, language from a website, et cetera, anything that would be helpful. And if you need recommendations, you can always contact us here at MEC, and we can hook you up with someone who might have a similar situation and be helpful and a support to you. And as I mentioned before, you need to create a website that complies with your federal, state, accreditor, accessibility, and SARA requirements. We are in the era of lots of regulation, and we are in an information era when you need to make sure that website is up to date, all the links work, and that is a great way for students and internal folks in the institution, faculty, other staff. People need to know how to reach you, how to get the information they need, and make sure everything goes well. Another set of recommendations is to establish a regular flow of information from the programs that serve out-of-state students. I also recommend having some type of funnel from the admissions department. Some of, especially the professional licensure rules, they want you to be providing accurate information to prospective students, not just current students. So it's really important to know if a student from a state where your program does not lead to licensure applies, that's a good time for you to begin to reach out to those departmental folks and say, okay, we've got these people applying, what are we going to do about this? Or if you've got students applying from a non-SARA state and you're not sure that you're in full compliance with those things, get that information flowing and have it flow in on a regular timeline. Create a timeline for collecting these updates and for touching base with these departments. It can be really frustrating and intimidating for a compliance officer or whoever is doing this kind of work at the institution to kind of go into a department at the last minute and say, I need to know where all of your clinical placements in Colorado are now. And because I've done that, and that was bad, I now know not to do that. But it's better if they know ahead of time, yeah, I'm going to need to know this, and this is why, and here's the webinar. Yeah, I know it's a lot, but it really is good for the students in the end, and let's work together to make it work. So just some little tidbits, some little, thoughts there. One of the things that also is really helpful is create an email address for state authorization questions that could be used by multiple people. So that if you're on vacation, someone else can answer it, or if there's a change of staff, which that's another reason I'm doing this webinar is I did do kind of an Here's SARA introduction in the spring of 2014, and a lot of people have changed their positions since then. So it's important to, anything that can create some continuity so things don't fall through the cracks is really, really important. And then always make sure that your institutional contacts are up to date with NC-SARA, and for that matter, here at MAC. We send our own newsletter out once a month. NC-SARA sends out data requests and newsletters and blogs on varying timelines. So you're not going to get those data requests. You're not going to get the information that you need if indeed they don't know where to send them. So let us know anytime, and we will get those updated for you. All right. Well, I finished a little bit early, so that either means more questions or we all get finished a little bit earlier today. So I am going to start taking a look at some of the questions that have accumulated while I was speaking. So you're going to have to give me a moment to read. Could you please speak a little more about adjunct faculty teaching from a different state than the home state where the campus is located, specifically if their residence is not in a SARA state? Sure. So if you have, let's say you have adjuncts on the ground in either California, Florida, or Massachusetts, it's going to be important to check with the authorizing entities there to see if they regulate on-the-ground faculty. Some states do, some don't. And if you are having trouble tracking down that information, you can contact me directly, and I am happy to help you figure out how to do that. I'm reading the next question. Okay. Is it true that even if you are a participating SARA institution and you have students doing internships in other SARA member states, that those states may have additional restrictions or criteria that the internship has to meet beyond simply complying with the Reciprocity agreement? I think I know what you're asking about here. When you have internships on the ground in another SARA state, the higher ed entity does not regulate those internships anymore. The SARA agreement is the regulatory basis of figuring out whether that internship is okay to be there, and is it too many students or whatever. As I mentioned, you do need to check with any of the relevant professional licensure boards in other states because they are not covered by the SARA agreement, but they might have some type of jurisdiction over or interest in those internships that it's important for the institution to find out about and comply with. Now, there are states where professional licensure boards are all organized at the state level, and therefore, in order to access the state's internships, it's going to feel like you're going through the state higher ed authorizing entity, but you're not doing it for state higher ed purposes, you're doing it for professional licensure purposes. I think that's what you were asking about. That tends to be the case in New York, and there are some other states where there are some things that are kind of like that. But if you have additional questions about that, please feel free to drop an email or give me a call, and we can talk about it in more depth. All right, next question. Once you apply and are accepted as a SARA institution, does the institution need to continue to agree to individual states that have separate refund policies that they will honor that separate refund policy? The answer is no. There's been confusion between state authorization and annual state report filings. Could you please share the difference with the webinar participants? State authorization is the educational aspect, and state annual report filing through the Secretary of State is doing business in other states. It is important to file the annual report with the Secretary of State in addition to being a part of SARA. This is an important thing, too. For those of you who have ever gone to any of the SAN workshops or looked at some of their information, and they do have a paper about this on their website, so I highly recommend doing that and taking a look at it. When you think about state authorization, there are really three different levels. There's the higher ed authorizing entity, there's the professional licensure board, the professional licensure boards in that state, and then in some states, the Secretary of State or the Corporation Commission or some other entity of that sort becomes involved. So sometimes you can go into another state and just say, I'm here as an educational institution and the Board of Ed authorizes me, or I'm authorized through SARA, and that's fine. But in probably almost half the states, that other entity wants to regulate you as a business. That is not covered by the SARA agreement, and that is separate. It is my understanding that SAN is working on some of these resources to help you both with a list and a set of contacts that make this easier to figure out. But whoever brought this to my attention, that was very good. If you are registered with the Secretary of State in another state, that being a part of state authorization, not covered by SARA, it is important for you to file that annual report because, again, that is not the same as submitting data to SARA. All right. Let's see. Can an institution apply for SARA if they are in candidacy status for accreditation? Well, I think that depends on whether they are switching accreditors. We have a number of ACICS institutions that are in candidacy status with other accreditors, and I think depending on the status of that application and the information that you would present to your portal entity, I think that can be approved under certain circumstances, but I think it would be a judgment call by the portal entity at that point. Can you discuss students who are in the military, including those out of the country? How do SARA rules apply? Okay, well, those are two different things. First of all, SARA is a great boon for the military community because it does allow, if you're stationed in Texas and you're in an online program that's coming from Wisconsin and you get restationed to Virginia, you don't have to drop out of your course. This is actually one of the big considerations and concerns when we were coming up with SARA, was taking a look at the number of exiting service members going back to school using those post-9/11 GI Bills, and it was a concern because many of them are accessing educational programs via distance modality. So if you are in the military and you get relocated between SARA states, there is no problem. If you're in the military and you are relocated from a SARA state to a non-SARA state, you're going to have to check with that state to see how they regulate online education in their military facilities, if they just see them as being part of the state or if they exempt them. And again, that will be different by each state. SARA will cover military activities on a military base or vessel or other type of installment if it is only offered to military personnel. As soon as it's a course that is offered to other people, then it is not covered, and again, it's going to be, the best thing you can do is check with the state portal entity in each state that is not a SARA state. As far as being out of the country, SARA does not cover any type of international placements or distance ed. When you, if you are delving into the realm of military education in other countries, there are a series of agreements that the military has with the various nations where we have stationed military personnel. That's far too much for me to go into with you right now, but if you wanted to give me a call, I could talk to you about that separately. Finally, if you're just talking about accessing non-military students in other nations, that is an entirely different thing as well. I do know that the folks at SAN and WCET are beginning to accumulate a little bit of information on international authorizations, and I don't know the status of that work at this point. How is a student's state of residency determined for SARA or distance ed? Well, and I'm going to break this apart into a couple of different questions. First of all, the state authorization rules, though we hear student state of residence often, we do not, that's actually not what you need to be mindful of. I mean, if we want to be really technical, what you need to be mindful of is where the learning activity takes place. So that could be any number of things. Until we are able to track course activity by an IPO, is that what it's called? Well, the web address. Until we're able to do that, we really have to have some other proxy for what we're using for student location. And so you have to determine as an institution how you define and track that information. And again, it needs to be a thoughtful, logical way to determine that, and it needs to be consistently reviewed like any other data field. And as long as you have a rational, consistent process for determining that, you get to determine that at the institutional level. Can you recommend any other resources for professional licensure information gathering in states? Thank you. Yes, well, I do know there are several organizations, again, SAN and WCET, kind of looking, and also SHIO, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Organization, all of those folks located in Boulder, Colorado, in that little cabal there. They're all working on this, trying to figure out something. And again, I don't know the exact status of those efforts. The professional licensure thing is difficult, and we're all aware of that in the state authorization world. So if you wanted to reach out to me, I could maybe give you some more specifics depending on the areas you're dealing with, especially in the Midwest. But as far as a blanket set of resources, I don't have anything to offer you at this point. I'm sorry. Next question. Is there a single resource website that tracks state-specific regulations and requirements? Physical presence, example. Well, what we have traditionally had is what's called the SHEO website, S-H-E-E-O, that organization I was just talking about a few minutes ago. They have a set of state authorization surveys that are completed by the state authorization entities in each state, and some keep them up very scrupulously and fill out the surveys in a lot of detail, and others not as much. And if you just go to the SHIO website, you will find them, and you'll be able to click down through them. If you wanted to give me a call, I'm also happy to help you with them and show you where the strengths and some of the challenges with using the SHIO surveys. It's my understanding, again, that there is some talk about enhancing those surveys and getting them more up to date in the coming year. So that would be fantastic. They have been an amazing resource for years now, and we have to thank Sharmila Mann, who ran them for years at SHIO, because we've all used them to the point where I don't know where we would be at this point without them. Next question. Is there any help with the state licensing boards through SARA? No, not yet. Sorry. We are having difficulty receiving information back from state licensing boards. Yes, I hear this a lot, and I think it's because a lot of the state licensing boards are kind of being overwhelmed with this set of questions, and they just didn't even know that the federal rules that were coming and all of the requirements that we have now for making proper disclosures for students in professional licensure programs. We have been working extensively with the nurses, the National Council for State Boards of Nursing, trying to get to help them understand what the requirements are so that they can respond more effectively and efficiently. But yeah, we still have a lot of work to do in all this, and we need to figure out who's going to do it and how we're going to do it. If you are having trouble though with a specific state, please we can help find some folks who can maybe steer you in the right direction. In regard to your early response regarding tracking supervised field experiences, it is my understanding that we need to track these through SARA, and we'll be reporting them optionally in 2018 and as a requirement in 2019. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. We don't have all the definitions for the data fields yet. We don't have a data manual for you yet on that, but I can tell you it's something. I'm on the data committee, so I do hear about these things as soon as some decisions are made. But we're going to be working on that pretty quickly because we know people already have to set that data in motion in order to give us information for next year. Next question. Would SAN consider allowing state authorization coordinators in institutions get their information even though the institution is unwilling to join SAN? I'm not sure. I know that SAN works hard to make itself an accessible organization. They do let schools join collectively. So if you join collectively to WCET, you can also do a collective membership to SAN so that you can at least share the information and have access to their wiki. As of right now, though, I do still think that's their model for how they do their work. I don't know what their plans are for the future. Last question that I'm seeing. Does SARA place a limit of 10 participants on group programs, such as study-away programs that earn coursework from a home institution by traveling to another SARA state for lectures and site visits? Okay, well, there's a lot going on in this question. So let's talk about where the limit of 10 people comes from. If you are sending students to a clinical internship or supervised field experience in another SARA state, you can send the first 10 of them without clearing it with the state authorization entity in that state. Once you need to put number 11 in the same internship, meaning they're doing exactly the same thing, they're getting the exact same degree, so it's the same placement, same degree. As soon as that's where you get to number 11, you need to clear that with the portal entity in that state. So we're in Minnesota. Say we want to send 11 people across the river to Wisconsin to a nursing site. We have to get that 11th person cleared with the DLAB, the Distance Learning Authorization Board in Madison. And it might be no problem, but they do get to make that call. Now, if we're sending 6 physical therapists and 5 nurses to the same hospital. We don't have to because they are not in the identical program. So I hope that helps you understand where the limit of 10 comes from. Now, as far as study away programs, that's one of the fuzzier areas in SARA. SARA covers field trips, but not field studies. And I have to say that when we have our thorniest, most confusing conversations at the national and regional levels, it tends to be around some of these issues. So if you have something more, there is no limit on the number, but defining actually where the line between a field study and a field trip, a short course versus a study away is, those types of delineations are more of a judgment call. Currently, we leave the call to the portal entity and the state where the activity will take place. But we are always looking for better ways to understand it and advise people. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you about it if you'd like. Let's see. Next question. Does one need and where would one find information requirement for authorization in Puerto Rico and Micronesia? Thanks. Now, Emily, help me out. Is Puerto Rico on now? Have they already joined, or they're really close? Puerto Rico is really close to joining. So Emily's going to try. They're not quite there. Okay, it will be soon. If you need to do some authorization inquiries prior to that time, give me a call and we'll find you the information you need. Micronesia, I don't know about theirs. I know they're not like lined up on the runway yet to join SARA. I know that all of the territories have had conversations, and I think there's kind of universal interest, but it can be a long process at the state or territory level. So again, go ahead and give me a call, and we will figure out what we can do to help your efforts along. Can you recommend a good database program for tracking distance learning and internship data? You know, I really can't. When I did this work at the institutional level, I used Excel, and it was the tool I had. I would not say it was optimal. I do know some people who do this work for large institutions who probably have some recommendations. So why don't you reach out to me, and then I'll reach out to them, and we'll get some recommendations for you and get you two talking, rather. Regarding CRAT guidelines, is there any expectation that universities will be required to complete any additional reporting or review beyond the annual verification that is part of the renewal process? Okay, so that's an example of something. I probably should have put that in here. One of the things you're going to agree to as an institution when you join SARA is to abide by what are called the CRAT guidelines, and that's the Council for Regional Accreditor guidelines on basically best practices in distance education. And for the purposes of SARA, we just ask that the signatory agent agree to abide by those guidelines. But this person's asking, will there be any additional verification? I don't think there will be any additional verification. I've never heard that discussed as something that will be part of the renewal process. Much of SARA is about saying, hey, someone else has already verified this. In the case of the CRAT guidelines, if you're regionally accredited, that's already been verified. If you are accredited by a national accreditor, some of them do roll in the CRAT guidelines, some do not. But you know, we haven't had problems heretofore, so I don't think there's going to. I just haven't heard anything about that. So if you have heard something and you want to discuss that with me, please give me a call. Any plans to expand into foreign education? Well, we talk about international authorization all the time, but I talk about that more with my SAN colleagues than with my SARA colleagues. So I think if someone were going to bite that off and start chewing on it, it might be the SAN folks. Is the 11-person based individual site only? If we were to have more than 10 students in a program, but they were spread across many different internship placements, that's okay? Yes, that's okay. You understood me correctly. What about authorization in Canada? I know that SAN is working hard on that, and because they work so closely hand in hand with SARA, I can hook you up with the people who would know about authorization in Canada. I know the Virgin Islands is approved, but can we enroll students in the Virgin Islands now? Some states in the past had a delay. Do you want to?
I was actually just responding to that via chat. I haven't seen or heard anything about a delay, and generally if there's going to be a delay, they indicate stuff on the NC-SARA website, and there isn't anything that indicates a delay there. You should be good to go. If you'd feel more comfortable contacting that state portal entity, you certainly could, but I haven't seen or heard anything that would indicate a delay.
Sounds like you're good to go. Okay, good. Have you heard of this software to track? Someone is telling me that she's heard of a software for tracking, but doesn't know of anyone using it yet. I'll take a look at that. Thank you for that recommendation. I'll have to take a look at some of those. All right. Are we getting any more questions, or do we look like we're good? I think we're good. Thank you so much. If you do have additional questions, please reach out. We are happy to help you. We want this to go smoothly, and SARA is designed to be something that makes your life easier. So thank you, everybody, and have a good day.